The sense of utter despair, and I think a degree of anger, not just that things have gone badly for Keir Starmer, but this is authored, a lot of it, by Keir Starmer himself. It's not just that the events of politics have conspired to make life difficult for him. It is that the ineptness, the unforgivability of so much of what has gone on.
They've hoped that there was a spirit of coalescence around the external enemy, i.e. Russia, Putin. If suddenly you're thinking that this is coming from within, from your own leaders, from those close to the leadership, what on earth are you doing? Why would you be fighting a war for that?
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And Clive Lewis is he the typical Labour MP? Does he represent the heart, the beating heart of the backbenches? Probably not. I mean, he's openly been critical of the leadership before, and he will do so again.
He's on the left of the party.
And he's on the left of the party. But it is sort of telling that people just think, yeah, I can go and do this now. I can say this now. And, back in when they brought down Thatcher, they talked about a stalking horse. I mean, it does look like it's all shaping up for a leadership contest, even though Keir Starmer himself, I keep hearing, doesn't think there's a problem and thinks that everything is fine.
You should explain a stalking horse, just because our younger viewers won't kind of go back to the Thatcher days. But
Sir Anthony Mayor was put up as a sort of person, not because he could beat Margaret Thatcher, but that he would open up a race. And that would facilitate Michael Heseltine coming into the race to be the real challenger to Margaret Thatcher, and that eventually sort of did work. That it did, in
other words, nobody's expecting Clive Lewis to be the next leader, and maybe it wouldn't even be Andy Burnham who's the next leader. But it just shows that the sands would start to shift around a new leadership contest.
Exactly, and so you kind of think, does this matter? Well, it's Clive Lewis. Maybe it doesn't matter that much, but that it's happening at all at such a terrible time for this government, given the events of the past week, where the kind of Rachel Reeves U-turn on what she was going to do about income tax, Keir Starmer sort of bringing the spectre of a leadership contest ever closer by Downing Street briefing that he would fight any leadership contest, and then sort of slagging off Wes Streeting and a couple of others in the process. It's also added to this sense of impending crisis when we are a week out from the budget.
I mean, you could say it's a really stupid time to do it. Inflation is down today. It's fallen lower than many had predicted. And they've had a really strong week on immigration messages. Now, whether backbench MPs will eventually support Shabana Mahmood, we don't yet know. But they've had a very strong message. It's been kind of well received by other parties, and it looks as if it is being well received by the wider electorate. And so in a way, it's a completely counterintuitive time to start raising the issue of instability once again in their own party.
I think there has been a psychological step change among Labour MPs. My impression is from conversations with them over the course of the last week or two. Everyone knew, if we'd been having this conversation a month ago, everyone knew that Starmer was struggling. Everyone knew that the poll situation was bad. It should be said that the more and more that those polls look like they are in stasis, which they've actually been remarkably stable for a long time now. If anything, Labour just gradually sort of declining, the worse the kind of political situation gets. But I think there has been a step change psychologically between that, the sense that he is in trouble, and a more real sense now that he cannot lead them into the next election. Now, of course, that could change, and it could be that the local election results next May, are anticipated to be so bad that psychologically they end up being slightly better, and that allows him to stay for longer. But I think that the general feeling among Labour MPs is that it's not just about the national poll rating, it's about his poll ratings. They are catastrophically bad. I mean, genuinely catastrophically bad. We've talked on this show before about the sort of slight curiosity, in a way, of why Starmer has become so reviled in the country. And he has become reviled in the country. He is now the most unpopular Prime Minister on record since modern polling began in 1977. That includes all of the litany of catastrophic Prime Ministers that we had in recent years, even at their nadir. And the feeling and concern is, among Labour MPs, is that Starmer may be irreparably damaging, not just himself, but the Labour brand overall. And I think that is the change that, in a way, Number 10 brought upon themselves when they briefed about Wes Streeting challenging him only last week. They've basically introduced and legitimised the idea of a challenge, which lots of Labour MPs were already thinking about because of that polling result, that set of polls about him.
I mean, I was struck over the weekend. I had kind of communications with former senior Labour minister, someone who is so tribally Labour it's not true, one or two others who kind of know about the Downing Street operation. And the sense of utter despair, and I think a degree of anger, not just that things have gone badly for Keir Starmer, but this is authored, a lot of it, by Keir Starmer himself. It's not just that the events of politics have conspired to make life difficult for him. It is that the ineptness, the unforgivability of so much of what has gone on from the Downing Street operation, needed to be called out. And just the language that was being used by people who I think are kind of,
temperate.
Just temperate, and they are Labour through and through, and loyalists, their sense of just despair was really palpable.
I do think, funny enough, I was reading Danny Finkelstein, The Times today, and he quotes Steven Pinker. I mean, this is sounding like Russian dolls, but bear with it. The Steven Pinker book is called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, Common Knowledge and the Science of Harmony. And Danny Finkelstein's point is that sometimes people can feel things, but they're not said out loud. The moment something is said out loud, it kind of legitimizes everyone else to start talking about it. In other words, the example he gives is the Emperor's new clothes. Everyone knows that the Emperor's wearing no clothes, but it takes the little boy to start laughing and pointing, and then everyone can go, oh, phew, it wasn't just me, it was you, it was you, it was you. And I think that's what the briefing did 2 weeks ago with Wes. I mean, we were sort of directed towards Morgan McSweeney as being the orchestrator. That has been denied. But let's just say, whoever it was that put out that slightly frenzied, pugilistic, sort of fight back leak, about Starmer's going to take it on and all the rest of it, unwittingly allowed everyone to kind of go, oh, wow, he really is in trouble then. Well, I see that wasn't just me thinking it privately on my own. Everyone's been having the same discussion. So it's almost like it was designed to work against Starmer, belying the very thing it was saying.
Well, also, as you say, we're a week to the budget. And I think the PLP, Parliamentary Labour Party, are deeply pissed off that they feel that the run-up to the budget, which is supposed to be the sort of seminal political moments of the autumn, around which some sort of fight back could begin, has itself been so botched. I mean, Kemi Badenoch had a line in Prime Minister's Questions today, which I thought, was pretty fair enough, when she said that this is the only budget which has fallen apart before it's even happened. Yeah. And I think that is fair enough, right? Because we spent, Rachel Reeves had that, early morning, almost felt like an emergency press conference that was supposed to be pitch rolling the budget and the idea of income tax rises. Now, we discussed that on the show at the time. I actually thought that the income tax rise stuff would be really catastrophic for them. But that was the pitch that is what she said was going to happen. And of course, what we discover only last week is that now they've decided, probably because Labour MPs, and they should have known this, were so down on the idea of breaking that manifesto pledge, they've retreated from it. And there was a good quote from a Labour MP, unnamed Labour MP, I think it was in the Times the other day. It said, this their quote, they said, they rolled the wrong pitch, right? And that is the problem. When you're basically leading your MPs up to the top of the hill, Duke of York's got
Please
enough.
don't.
No, I know.
We've had enough nursery rhymes.
I know. Well, yeah, but when you get marching them up to the top of the hill and you march them down before the battle's even begun, it just conveys a sense of political chaos at the top of the party.
I'd go back even further than that. I think if you wanted to point to the moment, we did all these sort of what-if episodes at History, the moment that Starmer stood up in the Commons, did not give the Chancellor his full backing, and then she began to cry, was clearly very upset, and the bond markets kind of took her side and he felt she was unsackable. I wonder if he had made a move at that point, if he had changed his Chancellor at that point, would it have provided insulation in the shape of something more creative, given more confidence, done more to stabilise the party now? And I sort of think, actually, the trouble is not... I mean, polling-wise, you're absolutely right, Lewis, in terms of where his numbers are. But I think it's the problem of him and her together. Yeah. They both sort of sink each other.
But that presupposes that there is a political titan that is waiting to take over as Chancellor, where the markets would feel confidence, the Labour backbenches would feel happy.
The markets would feel confident if there was somebody who just had the balls to kind of get on with the thing they wanted to do. And we haven't seen that. Really.
Also, she undermined her market. But by doing the income tax thing, the one argument they were making is that the markets would not tolerate her removal because she was willing to do the thing that no other person would be. But she undermined that one card that she had by retreating from the income tax pledge.
And of course, there is a very obvious point, which I haven't seen made that much. But if this had been the long-term thinking of the Treasury, that what needed to happen was for income tax to go up, and that was the neatest, best way to raise the revenues that kind of, to eliminate the shortfall. And that has been the planning process for weeks and weeks and weeks. And Rachel Reeves does that morning news conference, sort of more or less confirming that. And then they change their mind. It means that we are going to get a budget next week that has been cobbled together, that hasn't got any strategy, that is not got reform-minded kind of proposals in it, because it's all being rewritten really fast.
You mean little reform, not big reform?
Yeah, it's just going to be bits and pieces here and there, and it's being made up as they go along. And that ain't the way for good financial planning.
Well, she had a moment where she could have sold it as a good news story. Do you remember it was because the OBR said that her black hole was smaller than it was, that she could then not have to raise income tax. But that story got completely lost. Yeah. A massive PR failure if that was true. Or maybe she just didn't believe she could even sell it to the public. I don't know. But, now we've got this awful turn, the smorgasbord of taxes, as if everyone went to a buffet choosing their favourite tax. That's not going to work.
What I'd worry about, if I'm at number 10, this budget is clearly not going to be a happy budget. It's clearly been, as you say, John, quite sort of politically all over the place, and appears to be being cobbled together. The backdrop to it is this. You've got a member of the cabinet feeling able, and not just able, but licensed in a way, to go on television and attack, not the Prime Minister, but attack his number 10, which is basically tantamount to attacking the Prime Minister. You've got backbench MPs, albeit, as you say, Clive Lewis. The idea, I think, that Andy Burnham would go and seek a seat in Norwich, given his association with
King
Manchester.
of the North,
it would completely,
exactly.
So Norwich, it would completely undermine his personal brand, like it would be, politically. But the fact that you've got an MP openly saying, yeah, maybe I'll do this, and because maybe we need a vacancy, it adverts to a kind of like real collapse of authority at the centre. The one thing I'd say is, we're talking a lot about criticism of Starmer. I do think the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, I do think some of their MPs, I think some of these problems are about the sort of slight ungovernability of that group, considering how big, even despite how big the majority is. Because, yeah, indeed, yeah. And two things about that. One is, Boris Johnson said this, funnily enough, about the 2019 intake of Tory MPs. I think it's the same with the 2024 intake of Labour MPs. I think that, you've got a lot of younger, newer MPs. I think we have so many more polls than we used to. We have Twitter in a way that we never used to. And I think that there was a time when governments could be underwater, as recently as the Cameron government, could be underwater in the polls for quite long periods. And it results in, some nervousness and some conversation, but not in a sort of sense of existential angst. Yes, you've got the reform element as well, which complicates things. But I think the kind of skittishness of MPs is problematic. And the other thing is to say, I think in a way, do you remember during the election, there was all this talk about command and control selections of Labour MPs and sort of saying these are all going to be sort of people in Starmer's image and they're all from that wing of the party. I think one thing we've discovered with this intake is that they're not. They are actually substantially to the left. And I'm not talking about the Corbynite left, but they are firmly on the so-called soft left of the Labour Party. They don't like the welfare changes. They probably aren't going to like the immigration changes. They don't like the direction of the economy under Reeves. And that is why when we're hearing about all these potential successes, whether it's Burnham or Rayner or even, dare I say it, Lucy Powell, who I think is perhaps a bit underpriced as a potential future leader of the Labour Party, that they are all from that wing of the party and adverting to a sort of, even where Streeting pushing into this, a more left-wing agenda, because it's not just what you have to do to become Labour leader. I think it is where the median Labour backbench MP now is.
Well, I'd just say to your first point about Clive Lewis, though, I'm pretty sure that he has called for other Labour leaders to go. I think he called for Jeremy Corbyn to go. I think he is sort of a perennial caller for a change of leader, isn't he, in the Labour Party?
He's a maverick, I think.
Yeah,
it's fair to
maverick
say.
is the word.
But the fact, so you're right. But I think it's more that the fact that he feels if Starmer were doing better, he just wouldn't be there, right? It just adverts.
But Lewis, to your point about the soft left and the concerns that there are, and there are so many people of that wing of the party in the Commons right now. The Times is reporting today that the Tribune Group say they have the 80 MPs that are needed to back a candidate in a leadership contest that would, that trigger a leadership contest. Now, you don't know how solid that is. You don't know whether that is spin by someone in the Tribune group to try to kind of create a crisis or whatever. I mean, the details of that, I kind of never believe these things unless I can see the names of the people and who've been willing to publicly sign up to it. So you've got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But whoever the reporter was believes that there is sufficient in it, that they write up a story that, maybe there are enough MPs ready to go who are prepared to pull the trigger on Starmer's leadership. And the impression I keep getting from speaking to people in and around number 10 is that that Keir Starmer is sort of in a slightly other world about it, that, he's loving being Prime Minister, he enjoys all the kind of cut and thrust, and I think he's so removed from the politics of it, which is part of the problem.
Well, he's never been that sort of politician who that sort of backslapping kind of, in the tea rooms and all that sort of stuff. And again, it speaks to the sensitivity of Labour MPs. That there was a quite good story. I can't remember where I read it. It may have been in the FT. I can't remember. It was at the weekend, one of the big write-ups, which was talking about at a recent PLP meeting where Starmer was supposed to be sort of getting to know again some of his backbenchers a bit better, taking questions, and he didn't know someone's name, and he had to sort of ask them. And okay, he's got 400 MPs, but it's kind of symptomatic of that kind of it's been quite a long time since the election now, and it's one of those sort of petty things, but it sort of crystallises the kind of the kind of froideur that there is between the PLP, the backbenches, and Starmer himself.
I think it also goes back to one of our earlier discussions about whether delivery can save the party. And in a weird way, they could start to deliver on migration numbers now, if that's going to be the direction of travel under Shabana Mahmood. But I can see a world in which Keir Starmer doesn't then get any of the credit for that. It becomes the Home Secretary's triumph, and she is then sort of emboldened, and she looks like leadership material, and he looks like the guy who, just let her get on with it. So it's a very difficult place, because what has got to be in that budget next week for the pressure to go off now? I mean, it's a real challenge. If it does come down to delivery, is it almost now too late for delivery to make a difference to this, or is there still something that can shift it?
Well, I can't believe that anyone is going to come out of next week's budget and think, oh, well, that's
amazing,
great, fantastic, we're sunny uplands. I mean, I just think that there's going to be quite a lot of pain to go round.
You don't have to think sunny uplands, but you could think, oh, okay, that was genius. I didn't see that.
You could see that they will say that there's additional investment in the National Health Service to bring down waiting lists, or to, more GPs, or whatever it happens to be. But I don't think that gives you a feel-good factor about your own life instantly, because these are things that, are going to... People do respond much more instantaneously to, you look at the reaction of farmers to inheritance tax, for example, or whatever, or if there's going to be a wealth tax on properties.
If there was a wealth tax, would that keep the soft left plus the hard left of the Labour Party happy enough to say, okay, yeah, I can see the direction of the party now?
It might, I think it might do. I think in terms of sort of what happens to Starmer when it does. I mean, you mentioned that Times piece, John. I think sort of the two things I think are probably true. One is that I'm sceptical that right now there would be 80 MPs who, at this moment, or even in the wake of the budget, even if it was quite bad, would be willing to make the leap, because frankly, it's just a matter of the calendar. You're getting quite close to Christmas. It's the Parliament, we're going into recess soon, and then by the time by the time you get into the new year, you've got the sort of local elections coming down the track, and actually for a lot of the Labour leadership, heirs apparent, it would actually suit them far better to be after May than it would be before May, because you don't want to be the guy who sort of comes in and then, inevitably doing reasonably badly in places like Wales and so on. But I think it is true to say that even if that 80 threshold isn't there yet, I think hypothetically, if there were to be a contest and MPs were, whether they wanted to be or not, forced to choose and to ask whether they wanted to continue to support Starmer or not, I think I would say on the balance of averages, he'd probably lose that contest now.
We'll be back in a moment talking about Ukraine and about the massive corruption scandal that looks in danger of enveloping Zelenskyy.
So as Emily was saying, we're going to turn our attention to Ukraine. And of course, President Zelenskyy is very used in our country, across most of the West, to a pretty unremittingly good press. Obviously, he has become a heroic figure in his country, but also for many people around the world. It is also true to say that particularly over the last few months or so, there has been really for the first time since the war, a strongly developing critique of him and also some dissent towards him because of a series of corruption scandals which have been unfolding in the country. The most serious one involves something called Energoatom, which is the state nuclear energy operator in Ukraine. And investigators have basically said that it basically involves a vast kickback scheme which is worth $100 million, and it's been operating for years. And several people have now been charged with corruption, including a businessman who was close to Zelenskyy, especially before he entered politics. There's no evidence Zelenskyy himself has been involved, but the fact that it's reached people close to him has started to raise some serious questions, and there have been other associated scandals as well, and accusations of Zelenskyy that he is exercising a series of internal power grabs against his opponents, his political opponents in Ukraine.
Yeah, and on one level, this is a story of how well the anti-corruption agency in Ukraine is working. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau are the ones that exposed this. They wiretapped, they went after, they recorded the people at the centre of this. They found one of the guys who'd spent like millions on a gold toilet bowl. I mean, the stuff is ludicrous. They've got stories of tape recorded conversations about how heavy their bags of cash, their suitcases were to lug through Kiev. But the problem for Zelenskyy, I think, goes back to what happened in July, when the president's office began to put pressure on the anti-corruption bodies themselves. And on July the 21st, several detectives involved in the probe actually found themselves detained by security services. In other words, Zelenskyy is getting jumpy about what his anti-corruption officers are finding, and he tries to bring in a law. He suddenly tries to bring in a change to the law about what the anti-corruption agencies can do. He gets warned by Europeans, by the EU at the time, wait, why are you rushing this through Congress, through UK's Parliament so quickly? What's going on here? And he ended up having to roll it back. But I think this is another point at which Zelenskyy, not involved in the corruption itself, but possibly, as ever, involved in slapping down the people who were trying to uncover it? Does that sound like a cover-up of its own making?
And this is why I think on a wider political level, it's so bad for Zelenskyy and so bad for Ukraine, because the narrative was set on the MAGA right in America that what we're doing going to help this corrupt state where everyone is on the take, where everyone is on the make. You had Hunter Biden being appointed to a board of an energy company so that because his dad at the time was the vice president and, we could get some influence there. And it just further gives cement to the impression that actually Ukraine is fundamentally a corrupt country and that everyone's on the take and everyone's on the make, and why on earth should anyone be helping this country? And at a time when you've got, Europe trying to rally people to back Ukraine, you've got Trump sort of ambivalent, and it's a really awful position to reawaken those fears about the extent of corruption in the country.
It just makes it much harder to go to other countries and say, give us money for arms. And I also think it makes domestically Ukrainians wonder what on earth they're doing. They've had no electricity. They've seen their sons fighting on the front line and daughters. They've seen, they've hoped that there was a spirit of coalescence around the external enemy, i.e. Russia, Putin. If suddenly you're thinking that this is coming from within, from your own leaders, from those close to the leadership, what on earth are you doing? Why would you be fighting a war for that?
And this is one of the reasons why, listeners, viewers might remember last summer there were actually a series of quite significant protests on the streets of Ukrainian cities about this problem and about particularly Zelenskyy's move and the Parliament's move to make these anti-corruption agencies less powerful. And always there is such sort of nuance with this as well, because on one level, it is true to say that Ukraine, particularly by Western European standards before the war, did have corruption problems, and it was well known for that. Not as Zelenskyy, one of the reasons he was elected was to sort of clean some of that up. But as ever, a sort of war kind of has this sort of peculiar effect, right? Which is to say that actually one of the effects of the war has been to almost by default sanitize and clean quite a bit of that corruption up, because the Ukrainian state, as a result of the exigencies and the demands of the war, has had to be massively modernised. Ukraine is now one of the most digitised states in Europe. It does everything digitally. All of the kind of paperwork and all of the kind of like sort of corruption that was often endemic with that has had to be done away, because the state has had to become leaner, it's had to become faster because of the demands of the war. So it is true to say that, of course, wartime as well does present the possibility of the central state becoming more powerful, and obviously the president at the heart of that, who, after all, of course, is not currently subject to election, because you can't have an election while the war is going on. But at the same time, you have these kind of sort of countervailing forces of the state having to be deeply modernised, and local government in Ukraine becoming more powerful in a sense as well, because it has to be, because it has to do so much more on a day-to-day basis than it normally would because of the demands of war.
So what are you watching for this week? Well, possibly the sacking / resignation of Zelenskyy's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak. We're expecting there to be developments maybe as early as this weekend, Thursday, Friday. If he is sacked, I think that will be Zelenskyy's way of trying to, put a cordon sanitaire around himself and the corruption scandal and say he's going to be the fall guy, he's going to take the blame. Yermak, very, very powerful, often called the second most powerful figure in Ukraine, seen at Zelensky's side on a lot of foreign trips and seen as being the person who has essentially tried to shut down some of the anti-corruption measures, i.e. make those bodies less powerful than they are, curb their powers.
And you said what to look out for this week. I tell you, just arrived in Kyiv now is the Army Secretary, the US Army Secretary, along with 2 US 4-star generals. The reporting that I've seen coming out of America is that Trump has cooked up a 28-point peace plan a la Gaza.
When 20 isn't enough.
When 20 isn't enough, with Vladimir Putin, that Ukraine is being briefed on now. So, as ever, it's superpower politics, where America has gone directly to Russia, Trump's infatuation with Putin to try and get a deal there, and now, by the look of it, trying to impose it on Ukraine. Yeah. So you've got a corruption scandal that is emboldening the sort of MAGA right in America to think, what are we doing with Ukraine? And de facto, we've got the American top brass going to Ukraine, potentially to say, right, this is what we've agreed with Vladimir Putin, take it or leave it, this is a fait accompli. And so a pretty unhappy time, I would think, for Zelenskyy right now, let alone all the bloody attacks that are still continuing in terms of drones and missiles coming in from Russia, killing yet more civilians.
What's Ukrainian for piggy, do we know?
Quiet.
Quiet
piggy.
Quiet piggy, yeah.
Quiet piggy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Have you got
I've looked it up, yeah, it's Porosia.
Oh,
so something for Donald Trump to think about if he ever makes it to
If he gets asked any questions by any women.
Yeah, Porosia.
Porosia.
What is quiet?
What's quiet?
In Ukrainian.
It's tiki.
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 Tiki piggy.
Tiki Porosia.
Right. Goodbye.
No, we're coming back.
We're coming back.
Is it appropriate, Mr. President, for your family to be doing business in Saudi Arabia while you're president? Is that a conflict of interest? And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you? And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the
But the
worst.
question is
One of the
legitimate,
worst
sir.
in the business. But I'll answer your question.
Thank you.
I have nothing to do with the family business. I have left, and when I've devoted 100% of my energy. What my family does is fine. They do business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually. I'm sure they could do a lot. And anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided to leave that success behind and make America very successful. And I've made America more successful by far than it ever was, and that it ever could have been, no matter who was president. There would be nobody bringing in $21 trillion, that I can tell you right now. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
It's just you ask, Mr. President,
please, go ahead.
you allow me to answer. You know,
Things happen. The thing that happened
yeah.
was the murder
Of Jamal Khashoggi.
of Jamal Khashoggi in
Istanbul.
the Saudi embassy in Istanbul.
He was chopped up with a bone saw.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Things happen. And US intelligence looked into it. The murder happened in 2018. US intelligence come back and say, yep, MBS would have known about it, would have been briefed on the operation, if not the precise details of the murder. And Donald Trump obviously rejecting any suggestion that the US intelligence might be correct and that MBS is a decent, upstanding citizen, and it was
Who should not be embarrassed.
He makes things happen.
Who makes
he
things
does.
happen.
James knows.
Just can I add that I saw a notification on Monday that the Trump Organization, the business, had just concluded a big deal to develop hotels and a golf course in the Maldives. Where was the financial backing coming from? Oh, Saudi Arabia. Just the day before the visit.
Your next winter holiday sorted?
Yeah, just before the visit of MBS to the White House.
What's so interesting about that moment, though, is you saw Trump unable to deal with a journalist asking a question. I'm convinced that MBS would actually have handled that question with more sophistication and possibly more grace than Trump did. And yet the whole question there is about journalistic freedom, journalistic value, whether Saudi Arabia protects the freedom of reporting, and that is Trump's response in his own office to his own pool of independent, free-minded journalists. It still has the power to shock.
Yeah.
And MBS sat there thinking, there's a bit too much gold in here.
Yeah, it's a bit gaudy.
It's a bit gaudy. You've
gone
gone a bit over the top, Dom, with all this.
We're in Rattan now.
Yeah, God, I'm blinded.
Emily, have you got an apology to make?
Is this the
Yeah,
Robbie Gibb impartiality slot?
Yes, we're going to be doing that on a daily basis from now on.
I-
Sir Robbie Gibb. Sir Robbie.
Can we have
Sir
a
Robbie
music
Gibb.
bed to say this is the Sir Robbie Gibb?
On the Imperial March.
Yes, I would like to put not one hand up, but two hands up, because on the podcast on Monday, I incorrectly inferred that the fake Trident policy was one that belonged to the monster raving loony party, and I was corrected firmly by one Count Binface, who told me it was his. His policy was to pretend to have Trident, but to save $3 trillion, pounds. And so I would like to give a full-throated apology to Count Binface.
There you are. Impartiality, alive and well on the News Agents.
That's how you do it, Robbie. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.